Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to this Get Together brought to you by getAbstract. I'm your host for today's session, Kirsten Müller-Daubermann, and I'm so glad that you are joining us today. So we started these Get Togethers last week kind of as a live online reading club. We at getAbstract have a library of more than 22,000 books that we've created summaries for abstracts. And we know that this is a time when people are seeking out information and resources because of the unprecedented situation that we're facing regarding the outbreak of the coronavirus. We also know that more and more people are working from home, sitting in front of their computer screens. And we said, well, how can we bring our community together, utilize the resources that we have in our library, and bring some of the best authors, experts, and getAbstract team members together to put all of this information and these resources into context. So that's what these get-togethers are all about. While I wait for a few more people to sign on and everything, I will also let you know that this is a conversation. We want you to be involved. So as I talk and introduce our guest, Michael Stallard, for today, who's going to join me in 1 second. He's on the other side of the screen there. I just want to let you know that this is an amazing opportunity for you to ask Michael your questions. We're going to be talking about relational connection today, how to find that amidst social distancing and the new realities that we're facing in isolation. So now is your opportunity to hear what Michael has to say, but also to ask your own questions and maybe offer tools, tips, things that you've done in your own life to improve social connection. They could be really meaningful for other people who watch this later and see your comment in the comments section. So feel free at any time to join the conversation. We would love for you to be a part of it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest for today, Michael Stallard. He is the president and co-founder of the Connection Culture Group. And he's also the author of Connection Culture, which is in our getAbstract library, the competitive advantage of sharing identity, empathy, and understanding at work. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Kirsten. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's 10:30 where you are. Where are you joining us from this morning for you?
From Greenwich, Connecticut, about 45 minutes north of New York City.
Yeah, and I guess I would love to hear from you. We're here in Zurich. The headquarters for getAbstract is located in Switzerland. So we're experiencing the European part of this pandemic. Obviously, you're just outside of New York, which is considered to be one of the hot spots in the United States for all of this activity, increasing infections, unfortunately, increasing death toll. What has your experience been like so far, and how are you and your family doing?
Thanks for asking. We're doing fine. I think our local, the several hospitals in the area are our clients. Yale New Haven Health System, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. And I think, they're starting to see the surge now. So the hospitals are very busy. 911 is very busy. We haven't hit the peak, I'm sure, but it's a scary situation where I think healthcare workers are extended, and there are concerns about will there be sufficient equipment like ventilators to help all the people who are in need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that update. And it's good that we all share kind of the news and what's going on in our little corner of the world. It helps us connect. And that's exactly what we want to talk about today, is how to stay connected in our current context. But I'd love to hear from you, because you really are the go-to guy for organizations who are trying to help their leaders to cultivate connection within their workplaces and create that culture. What got you interested in this topic of connection to begin with?
Well, it was a confluence of factors. I worked on Wall Street for most of my career, and one of the things that caught my attention was 4 out of 5 mergers don't create economic value. And oftentimes there's a clear plan going into the merger, but it's sabotaged after the merger closes when the two cultures try to come together, but they don't connect. And so it impairs their ability to execute the plan, and it destroys value that they were anticipating getting. So that was one of the things. Then also just my personal career. There were times I worked in cultures that energized me, Kirsten, and other times that were cultures were draining the energy out of me. And I became interested in what is the best culture that would help me thrive in my career. And eventually I decided to leave Wall Street and put together a team. We did research for several years, and it really led me to this thing that was not on my radar screen at the time. I would say in hindsight, I didn't really value relationships. I was all about tasks and results. And even in my personal life, my busy schedule, commute into New York City, longer work hours, and some challenging mergers I worked on just squeezed out time for friends. And even when I was at home, I was thinking about work. I started not feeling well, and which is predictable when you're lonely, but I didn't realize I was around people, but I didn't have those close relationships where I was processing my life. I was still focused on getting tasks done. And I started not feeling well. I started developing some addictions. But at the time, I didn't realize I was lonely, that I was hardwired to connect. So there's a real personal story behind this for me that I feel like there are a lot of people like me out there who don't know they have a need for connection. And when that need is not met, they will dysfunction emotionally and physically.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. And I love that you are vulnerable in that way. And it's just so cool to me to see, okay, Wall Street guy, extremely successful, task oriented, probably someone who those around him look at and think he has it all together. And yet you discovered, hey, I actually don't. And then you transitioned that into this wonderful work now of helping others. And that leads me to ask you, so you have the book, The Connection Culture, which we have put a link to that book in the comment section. But kind of piggybacking on that, you wrote this great article for LinkedIn. It's called Why Relational Connection is So Important During the Coronavirus Pandemic. Obviously putting all this into context. So my question is, were you responding to a specific need from clients who said, hey, we need to talk about relational connection now? Or was this just something that you could see where this train was headed and you're like, I got to give business leaders the tools that they need?
Well, my wife and colleague, Katie Stallard, we put our heads together. And when this happened, we started thinking, how can we help people? And we have a unique expertise in this area. And just because of my understanding of, interacting with the researchers, really getting into the research, it was predictable. We already, before the coronavirus pandemic, we were experiencing a loneliness epidemic around the world. And with this additional physical isolation, I knew from the research that there's a risk more people would be struggling with those needs for connection would not be met. And it would trigger the stress response, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So it was a mix of, I remember interacting with the CEO who was telling me he was getting calls and hearing from employees who were struggling with anxiety and loneliness working from home. And that was a short time into when people had moved to start do more remote work as a result of this. So those two things really helped me see that this was going to be a big issue. And it's a really important message for us to get out there. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity that we can share this with your followers at getAbstract today.
Of course. So let's go through what those terms actually mean. These new vocabulary words: social distancing, self-isolation, quarantine. Why don't you just break down which each of those actually mean? Because a lot of them are being used interchangeably when they actually have very different definitions.
They do. They have very precise definitions. Social distancing is it's a public health term that really applies broadly to all of us. It means doing things like avoiding large-scale events like parades or concerts or services for faith, spiritual communities. Just staying out of large crowds, or things like staying 6 feet away from people is another practice that falls under social distancing. So that's relevant to all of us. The next term, which is quarantine, is really applies to people who there's a concern that they've been exposed to the virus. And so we quarantine them for a period of time to see if they become sick. And then once we know that they have the virus, then that's when the third term, isolation, applies, where they're really put in a very strict situation where they're not around people at all, so that we can eliminate or reduce the risk as much as possible of transmission. So the three terms are different. They're all about maintaining a physical distance, but they apply broadly and then all the way down to the person who actually has a virus.
Yeah. So as these restrictions are becoming more and more strict across the world, why does this come at such a uniquely bad time? Because we're more connected, maybe virtually or digitally, than ever, all around the globe. But there's actually an epidemic of loneliness that's occurring. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've been seeing research for a number of years. And back in 2002, when I started working on our first book and doing research on it, there were some academicians who were picking up on just the rise of loneliness post-World War II. But it's really accelerated in recent years. And the most recent research comes from the insurance company Cigna, that they did research in the second half of 2019. This was in America. It was 10,400 respondents. And just most of the academic researchers in this area used the UCLA loneliness scale. And what they found was in America, 61% of American adults, so 18 and over, were lonely based on the responses to that scale. And that is a rise from the prior year. And that's 2/3 of American adults. So that's a problem. There's a high probability that many of them, their bodies will be in a state of stress response, which has consequences in terms of emotional and physical health.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about those consequences, because I think sometimes people hear, oh, loneliness is a problem, and they think, that's just feeling sad, or, oh, I feel lonely today. But chronic loneliness actually wreaks havoc, not only on the mind, but physically as well, physiologically.
Right. Yeah. Connection is baked into our nervous system. And when our brain perceives that we don't have those supportive relationships that help keep us safe. In other words, we feel lonely. We could be around a group of people, but we don't feel connected to them. So that's loneliness. Or we could be socially isolated, which means we're just not around people. Objectively, no one's near us. And those two states, there's a high probability our body goes into the state called stress response. And that's in contrast to homeostasis, which is a scientific term that means balance. And so what happens under normal conditions, when we feel safe and we're around people, our body's in this state of homeostasis or balance, and blood, glucose, and oxygen flows to all the bodily systems at levels they need to be healthy. But when our brain perceives a threat in our environment, including loneliness or social isolation, it perceives as a threat, it throws us into this stress response. So it immediately starts allocating, or I should say over-allocating, blood, glucose, and oxygen to the fight or flight system. So the heart, the lungs, the big muscles. At the same time, it under-allocates blood, glucose, and oxygen to the hippocampus in the brain, which is part of our memory, the digestive system, so we're more likely to feel upset stomach or irritable bowel syndrome, a number of digestive disorders. Our immune system is compromised, so we're more vulnerable to sickness and disease, and the reproductive system also is under-resourced. And so being stuck in that state makes us feel lethargic. We don't feel well. We can start to experience pain. And oftentimes, to cope with that emotional and physical feelings of illness, we look for, we turn to substances or behaviors, most of which are addictive. Rather than connection, which is what we need, we'll turn to, it could be alcohol to numb the pain, it could be tobacco, it could be addictions to shopping, to sex, to work. There are a number of, they're either substances or behaviors that do have a chemical effect on our body, but they require more of the behavior or substance over time. And so it does become addictive. Much better is having the supportive relationships so that our body is back in a state of homeostasis. And we feel, we're able to do better work. We think more clearly, and all of our bodily systems are working as they're meant to.
Yeah, thank you so much for laying that out for us. And I think your message is probably resonating with a lot of people right now, because your brain and body is so affected by this in ways that sometimes you don't even realize. And so I hope that this is maybe lighting up some light bulbs in the heads of people listening right now and saying, maybe I'm feeling this way, or my body is responding this way because I'm lonely. So now we have a conundrum, Michael. We are in a time where we need our immune systems to be healthy. We need to be able to fight this disease with everything that we have, both individually and as a society. And yet we have to stay away from each other, which produces loneliness, which produces all of these negative effects that you just said. So, how in the world do we find and cultivate connection in this time when we have to stay far away from one another?
Yeah, we're really in a situation where, like you say, we need to preserve that physical distance so that we reduce the risk of transmission of the virus. And yet at the same time, we need to have that need for connection met so that our bodies don't dysfunction. And I also want to point out that, there are detriments to not having that need for connection met, but there are also benefits to having connection. I like what Matthew Lieberman, the neuroscientist at UCLA, calls connection a superpower because it makes us smarter, happier, and more productive. And I think we could all use that. It just makes us more emotionally resilient. So, here's the challenge. How do we preserve that physical distance and yet have that need for connection met? And in the article, we list 12 ways. And just when you look at those, you'll see part of them are about self-care, because we can't give to others what we don't have. So we need to be in a good, solid emotional state to be able to reach out and connect with others. You think of when people are on an airplane, and if there's a problem with oxygen, the mask drop down, and the instructions they give you is, if you're an adult with a child, to put your mask on first so that you don't risk passing out, and then you can't help the child, right? So, the same applies in this situation, that we need to make sure that our needs for connection are being met, that we're taking care of our health, we're, getting some exercise, eating healthy. Especially important is sleep right now to keep our immune system strong. So, and when those needs are met, then we can reach out and help others. And so there are several things. A lot of people are doing, virtual coffee breaks. I'm doing that a lot. I feel like I'm on the video calls with people for much of the day. And we're also staying in touch with our children. We have a daughter in grad school at IE in Madrid right now. So we're staying in touch with her, texting and video conferencing. I remember the other day I was having breakfast while she was having lunch in Madrid, and we were, talking to each other on our laptops, but actually seeing each other. Yeah. And then we have a daughter in Calgary and a son-in-law and granddaughter there. So doing those things are very important. Also, I wanted to make this point. It's especially important that this is a time when people may be struggling with anxiety and stress. You think about just the coronavirus itself is a stressor. And looking at the research, Gallup research showed that 80% of Americans, anyway, reported that they were afflicted by stress. This was before the coronavirus. So adding this on top of additional stress and perhaps economic worries for a lot of people, there's going to...
3.3 million jobless claims in the U.S. last Friday. Alone. Right. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, so we really need that connection. Connection helps prevent our body from going in that stress response. And so some very wise advice is never worry alone. Bad things happen when we worry alone. When we don't have someone to process it with, there's a high probability that our brains are really operating from the amygdala, where we process threats. It's about an almond-shaped almond-sized piece of the brain where we process threats. And that's going to be activated if we're lonely or socially isolated and we're worrying and feeling anxiety. However, if you and I got on a call, Kirsten, and I was struggling with anxiety, but we were able to just talk through the issue, you just a sympathetic ear, empathetic ear, to talk through the issues. It actually has the effect of engaging the prefrontal cortex of our brain, where we make rational decisions. And at the same time, it quiets the activity in the amygdala. In other words, it quiets our nervous system. So it's a really important point to never worry alone. A second thing I want to raise with your followers who are on with us today is just the importance of reaching out. I was saying, phone calls, virtual coffee breaks, things like that. But don't underestimate the power of things like writing letters or sending greeting cards. I know my daughter Elizabeth, every time she receives a card from me, and I try to send them frequently, she takes a picture of it and texts it to me. Thanks, Dad. But we've kind of lost that. We don't do that as much these days. But handwritten letters and cards really have a huge impact. The other benefit is that, during this time, there's a risk that we may be checking our email all the time, watching the news feeds all the time. And those are activities that trigger dopamine, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter that at higher levels produces nervousness. And it's just not healthy. We need more activities that produce neurotransmitters like serotonin. And the difference is dopamine is an excitatory neurochemical. Is the serotonin produces a sense of contentment. Dopamine produces a sense of short-term pleasure. It doesn't last very long, but serotonin actually can last for days or weeks in our system. And so those things like writing letters, actually painting, crafts. My daughter in Madrid ordered crafts and games for her and her 4 roommates to do during this time when they're isolated. And that was very wise of her to do that, because those are activities that produce serotonin, that give us that sense of contentment. And we talk about this in more detail in the article. So I would encourage those with us today to look at the article, and it goes deeper and has a link to an article that goes even further in depth. But that's going to be a big issue while people are isolated today. So those are just a couple of things to consider.
Yeah, I love those. And I just echo what Michael said, that this article has great ones. He talks about playing music, going for walks, pausing to be grateful. That's one of my favorites. Learning something new, and highlights the various cultural institutions that are offering free online visits to their museums or zoos. And so there really are a lot of great ways to stay connected to each other as a culture, but also those people that we love and are most important in our lives, even if we must do so from a distance at the moment. Michael, I've got a question. You already answered one of our viewers' questions, so that's great. Michael was asking about analog ways to embrace and cultivate connection, and you talked about phone calls and letter writing. But also Lauren asks, how do you stay so positive when there's no end in sight to this quarantine?
Well, it's important to, in the article, I actually have a link to Larry Brilliant's his TED Talk called "The Case for Optimism," and it's about his involvement with the World Health Organization. And I would encourage people to watch it. I really believe that there is a case to be optimistic. When you look at just the trickle of new viruses that are being reported in China or South Korea or New Rochelle, New York, not far from us, that really did isolate people, and the virus died down. And so we're seeing results there. So, that's going to happen. There are parts of the world that are really going to struggle. But I think over time, more and more countries are going to get a handle on this. It may take a while, but there is a case for optimism, and don't lose sight of that. So I'd encourage you once again to look at that article and watch Larry Brilliant's TED Talk, because it's he talks about the eradication, his involvement in the eradication of smallpox in the world. And do not estimate the power of people to pull together for a cause greater than self. And great things are happening worldwide. There is a case for optimism, and I believe we're going to beat this. It's going to take some time. Vaccines are being developed worldwide, and great. In time, we're going to get through this. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And we actually have another great question from Jimena. She asks, the plague, or the Black Death in the late 1300s, was a prerequisite for the Renaissance. Crises usually force us to do things differently, to think in new ways. What do you think our future will be?
What a great question. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that. So thanks for bringing up that question. I think it's very interesting. There is a duality of effect going on. Number one, I do believe people are appreciating connection more as a result of this. That's going to be one positive outcome. But when you look at the research, there's also a potential negative, and that is when we're connecting less face-to-face, spending less time connecting, then we already have experienced a decline in connection. Our ability to connect diminishes. And so I think there's going to be a need for organizations and individuals to really be intentional about reconnecting once this passes. So it just depends on how long are we in a state like this before we're back in the workplace and connecting with people face to face. I don't think we really know right now. And what impact does that have on our brains, on our the endocrine system that we have that allocates hormones around our body. So we're digging into the research and just thinking that through now in anticipation of when we come out of this, what solid advice can we provide to individuals and organizations to help them reconnect their employees so they get a high level of employee engagement, cooperation, collaboration, et cetera. So very good question.
That's so good. Yeah, that's so good. Thank you for those insights. We have a great Facebook comment that just popped in, and it says, I've noticed that connection my kids, elementary and middle school, need with others is important. I found they have relief when they get to use the Zoom app that schools are using to connect with kids in the classroom. The teachers use it to teach, but also to check in while we homeschool. Meeting with their classmates each day is something that really excites them. That's the kids. And that is so cool. And I'm so glad that teachers and kids are getting that experience. But that leads me to kind of one of our last questions here, Michael, as we wrap up. And that is that this virtual space has become a lifeline for us to see our loved ones and to have these virtual coffee hours and to work on Teams or in whatever way we're continuing to work remotely. But how do we find that balance between not putting all of our community online? Because it's how do you strike that balance? How do we all?
Well, a lot of it's not voluntary right now, right? But, like for example, Katie and I were working from our home. So, we're together and we're not really interacting much with we had a virtual meet up with our next door neighbors just yesterday morning. So it's, in the current state we're in, it can be potentially dangerous, especially for older individuals or those who have compromised immune systems. We run the risk if we're out in the community of bringing that back to our loved ones who, are, in our case, our elderly parents who are in their 80s and 90s. So we don't really have much choice at this point in time. And my concern, Kirsten, is primarily for people who are alone right now. And that's hard just to be physically alone. And so they really need to be intentional about reaching out. And don't wait for people to connect with you. Reach out and connect with people. And if you have multiple friends, try to connect them through Zoom or Google Hangout and other applications where you can get online. Try to, do something where you're meeting people online 3 times a day, maybe a virtual coffee break in the morning, a break for tea in the afternoon, and I wouldn't do happy hour every day. That's probably not a healthy practice, but reach out to an elderly relative, or in our case, our kids who are spread out in the evening. And if you're doing that throughout the day, you're much less likely to feel lonely because you can connect with people online. We can see them. We can have deeper conversations about how we're doing, and it's important for us when we serve others. That also helps us too. It's called Helper's High. It makes us more resilient. It has a positive effect on it generates positive emotions. So looking for ways to help others during this time is a great thing too. And once we get past this, then we'll move back to hopefully a state where we appreciate connection more and we're more intentional about connecting.
So wonderful, and truly a fabulous way to end the Helper's High. I love that. All right, I'm gonna go help my husband make dinner. How about that? No, Michael, it was such a joy to have you on. Thank you. And thank all of you who are watching and were a part of this conversation. We really hope that you were able to glean some practical tools some wisdom from Michael, and this will help you to stay connected to your team, whether it's at your workplace, your family, or friends. And if, of course, this was meaningful to you, please share it. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're here, is to give you the resources you need to make it through this pandemic and on the other side stronger. So please share these resources. Also, we want to invite you to sign up for the free newsletter that we're offering here at getAbstract. It's called The Journal. It's every day, the latest news, trending topics put into the context of what we're facing. And also there you can find the link to the complete schedule of upcoming get-togethers. So you know who our guest is tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the whole week. And of course, you have the abstracts, the reading list. So anyway, we can't wait to see you back here tomorrow. Same place, Facebook, YouTube, and of course, Vimeo. We'll see you at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time in the US with another guest to hopefully bring you the resources that you need to make better decisions in your personal and professional lives. From all of us at the team here at getAbstract, we wish you a wonderful day. Thank you again, Michael.
Thank you, Kirsten.
And we'll see all of you soon. Ciao.
Okay.
Extraordinary challenges require extraordinary responses from thought leaders, company executives, and employees. As the coronavirus pandemic unfolds and businesses scramble to adapt to escalating containment efforts, getAbstract is here to help organizations navigate this crisis wisely and professionally. For over 20 years, we've been committed to providing relevant knowledge from reliable sources to help people make better decisions in their personal and professional lives. In line with our mission to empower decision makers with relevant knowledge from trusted sources, we are proud to offer businesses free access to our full library until May 18. Embark on a no-strings-attached knowledge journey with getAbstract. Sign up today.